Majority of Africans perceive corruption to be on the increase, with 75 million people agreeing to have paid a bribe in the past year. That's according to a Global Corruption Barometer survey released on the sidelines of the Africities summit in Sandton, north of Johannesburg. For more on these stats, we are joined live in studio by David Lewis of Corruption Watch. Thank you very much for joining me, David.
Pleasure.
Now, David, should we be shocked by these stats considering the high levels of corruption globally?
Yeah, we haven't seen the reports yet from the rest of the world. This is the sub-Saharan African report, but the figures are pretty concerning, and the South African figures in that are maybe particularly concerning.
Let's zoom into Africa. Which countries see the most corruption and why, based on this survey?
I'm trying to recall South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Madagascar. There are a host of countries at the high end, at the highest end. I recall those four were particularly at the high end.
In this context, is South Africa topping that list?
Well, it's topping it in some of the measures. So, while 58% of Africans, of the 45,000 African citizens that were surveyed, believed that corruption was increasing in their countries, 83% of South Africans did. 79% of the South Africans surveyed believed that the government was not doing enough to combat corruption. That's much higher than most. Only Madagascar and Zimbabwean citizens believe that their government is doing less to combat corruption than South African respondents.
Now, how do we break the culture of corruption? Because it seems like it's being taken as a norm that when doing business in Africa, there's some sort of corruption taking place. And you even said it seems like South Africans as well don't have the faith that government is curbing corruption.
Well, they don't have the faith that government is curbing corruption, but the survey results are quite encouraging when asked whether they think there's a role for the public in combating corruption. They believe that there is, which is very encouraging, because South Africans, I don't think, have given up on fighting corruption, as in many countries have. They believe that there's still something that can be done about it, which is important. So public participation is important, and the South African public indicate, they do to us in our daily work, but they do on the survey, indicate that they believe that. And then punishing those involved in corruption is very important. So in South Africa, I think those results are very much contributed to by the Nkandla issue and the way in which government handled the Nkandla issue, where I think the perception is that you can get away with anything as long as you're well connected enough. And if the police and the prosecuting authorities don't start prosecuting corruption targets, big corruption targets, we're going to land up in some very serious trouble.
Now, looking at the survey specifically, beyond releasing the stats, are there any interventions that are suggested to curb corruption?
Yeah, there are a range of interventions that are suggested. Better protection for whistleblowers. Respondents indicate that reporting corruption is the most effective thing to do, although they do indicate in South Africa and elsewhere that they're fearful of reporting corruption. So protection for whistleblowers is important. The police are identified as the most corrupt. Action there is important. There are a range of very general recommendations that are suggested, yeah.
Now, this survey was released on the sidelines of the Africities summit.
Yeah.
What is the role that summits like Africities play in terms of curbing corruption? And what I'm trying to say is, how do we move beyond talk shops and actually start seeing action? Because every year the stats come out and we say we're worried about corruption, public participation is important, we don't have faith in government, etc.
Yeah.
But when do we actually start seeing action?
Well, I'm not sure what role the Africities summit plays in this, but I think that we are seeing action, and you see it in a variety of ways. I think, here we are involved in action, civil society are involved in action. we see many senior people in government really concerned about what's going on. There are obviously a hell of a lot who are not too concerned, who are still in denial, but there are many who are. So I think we do see action, and then you see action in all sorts of ways. I mean, I hope it's not a case of the new broom sweeps clean, but the new Tanzanian president, for example, in the first few weeks of office has taken some extraordinary action. The Malawian president, similarly. There is interesting action coming out of Nigeria, the newish Nigerian government. And so, yeah, I agree with you. We need action. We need action here. But I think we need a leadership that is really staking a very serious claim to be combating corruption. And I'm afraid at senior levels of leadership, South African government's not yet doing that.
David, this topic of corruption is multifaceted. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That was David Lewis of Corruption Watch talking us through the Global Corruption Barometer survey.